Jay Electronica is one of my favorite rappers to ever live. In fact, if every musician alive all released music on the same day, he would probably be my first listen. Every time he drops a verse is like a holiday for me. But with that being said, we're in 2023, and it's been over 20 years since his career started. In 2020, just as I was about to give up hope that we would ever get to hear that Jay Electronica album, he blessed us with his official debut album, A Written Testimony, and later that year we semi-officially got the long-awaited release of his album Act 2. Even though these projects weren't exactly what we expected, they still both ended up in my top 5 of that year. For most people, these albums would have answered all their questions. Either they were disappointed with the quality, and they write off Jay as someone who was simply overhyped, or they were pleased with the quality of the albums and live happily ever after. But I live somewhere in between. I was content for a while after these albums. I replayed them both over and over throughout the pandemic, but slowly that yearning for more started to creep its way back into my fandom. That hope that I had for 10 years, believing that he would someday release one of the greatest albums of all time. And I started to wonder, it's now been a few years since A Written Testimony. Did that album open the floodgates of creativity for Jay? Could there possibly be another new album on the way? Around a year ago, Westside Gunn announced that Jay Electronica would be signing to Griselda Records, and with Griselda's frequent release schedule, surely we were only a few months away from the next Jay Electronica project. But we're still waiting, and probably will be waiting for a while. But while I wait, I've been looking back at his career and what could have been. If there are a million multiverses, I can't help but believe that we are in the one where Jay Electronica isn't regarded as the greatest rapper to ever live. The crazy thing about Jay Elec is that if you gather up all of his verses over the years, on all of the demos, mixtapes, and leaks, he probably has more music than Biggie, Andre 3000, and Tupac. But while their what could have beens place them in many people's top 10s, Jay's what could have beens are holding him down, stuck somewhere on his hard drive, waiting for a crown that would never come. Jay Electronica's career is hard to talk about because it's more filled with unofficial and unreleased music than stuff that he officially gave us himself. So I'm going to start off with the main stuff before I go back and look at the deep cuts and what ifs. Timothy El Pardo Thedford was born and raised in New Orleans, Louisiana in the late 70s, but his story first appears to hip-hop around 2007 when he released his debut mixtape, Act 1, Eternal Sunshine, The Pledge. If you've been watching my channel for a while, then you know that I'm often prone to hyperbole, but I'm not exaggerating when I say this is one of the most interesting pieces of art in hip-hop history. The project is essentially one 15-minute song, split into 5 sections. It starts off with telephone interludes from Just Blaze and his then-girlfriend, Erykah Badu, before unleashing some of the most spectacular rapping of this century, all on top of the musical score to the 2004 film Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. I honestly can't imagine hearing this blind in 2007 with no knowledge of who Jay Electronica is. Just a spectacular, almost mythical rapping performance, and the promise of more acts to follow. It's no wonder that expectations were so high for him going forward. Just Blaze is one of the definitive producers of the 2000s, and some of his finest work came with Jay, in the form of Exhibit A and Exhibit C, which was released in December of 2009. This may be a hot take, but to me, Exhibit C is one of the 25 greatest hip-hop songs ever recorded. The beat is so iconic, and every single word that Jay raps is a declaration that he's one of the best MCs in the world. After a bidding war, Jay ended up signing to Roc Nation, and his debut album was on the horizon, or at least we thought. We waited and waited, and Jay would tease us with release dates and track lists that would ultimately amount to nothing for the next decade. Before we get to Act 2, I want to travel back in time, way back to the very first Jay Electronica album. The Awakening was recorded in the year 2000, with Jay rapping under the name Jerry. This project's existence was completely unknown until it leaked in 2016. The production is very stuck in the turn of the century, and the mix is a bit rough, but Jay stands out as an MC with a bright future, and while he hasn't yet mastered the craft, his delivery and lyrics still show the roots of the incredible MC that he would become. In the early 2000s, Jay was working on an album called War with the Dragon. This is the first of Jay's catalog of lost classics. It's been described as the greatest album that you'll never hear, and it was composed of 10 songs recorded in 2002 and 2003. It was completed in 2003 and got into the hands of Diddy, who was always rumored to be in the running to sign Jay to a deal. In 2004, Jay was actually covered by the Source magazine and was featured in their unsigned hype section, and they reviewed War with the Dragon within this piece. So that confirms that the project was the real deal at the time. A few of these songs have shown up on future Jay Elec mixtapes, but about half of them are still missing. In 2004, he began teasing a new album titled Lock, Stock, and One Smoking Barrel. At that time, Jay had a website called magnetic7.com. Jay would write posts about the album, teasing details about it, and writing fake news stories about this new rapper named Jay Electronica. In one of these articles, he mentions Lil Flip, Jay Dilla, Denon Porter, and Knots as producers for the LP. This one was supposed to be around 20 tracks, and Jay even posted a track list at the time. A few of the War with the Dragon tracks were on this one, so it might just be a revamped version of that. But either way, it's a shame that this project will probably be lost forever. In 2019, a leaked album's worth of tracks from the early 2000s surfaced that came to be known as the Detroit Demos. These reportedly came from a friend of Jay's back in 2002, in the form of a CD with the words "Don't Sleep" written on it. A couple of these tracks were on War with the Dragon and Lock, Stock, but this isn't either of those projects. It's more of a compilation of various loosies from that era. If you're hungry for more Jay Electronica raps like I was, definitely check this project out. It builds on his work from The Awakening and bridges that gap to his lyrical prime in 2007. After Jay released Act 1, he was one of the hottest rappers in the game, and he made sure that his fans were eating. In 2007, he released a 12-track mixtape called Style Wars, and he followed that up with Attack of the Clones the following year. These songs are where the majority of the canonized Jay Electronica songs were released, from Abracadabra to Renaissance Man, from Dimethyltryptamine to Victory is in My Clutches. Most of my favorite Jay Elect songs of all time are on these two projects. If anybody ever says that Jay Elect doesn't have enough full-length projects to be considered as one of the greatest rappers ever, just point them in the direction of these two, which I feel like most people overlook when discussing his career. I originally came across most of these songs on the compilation tape called What the Fuck is a Jay Electronica, which is one of the greatest gathering of beats and bars of all time to me. But even with all that great music that he was releasing at the time, this era was plagued by projects that didn't quite happen. We all know about Act 2 Patents of Nobility, which Jay announced shortly after the release of Act 1, and that went unreleased for over a decade, but another project was once slated to follow up Act 1. Abracadabra, Let There Be Light was at one time planned to be his first official full-length LP. I assume most of what this album was intended to be became Act 2, because not much is known about it otherwise. The original version of Act 2, Patents of Nobility, was recorded back in 2007, before being reworked into what we got in 2020. And even Act 3, The Last Will and Testament of Timothy L. Pardo Thetford, was supposedly recorded in 2007 to conclude the trilogy. But after waiting so long to hear Act 2, I'm not holding my breath that this trilogy will ever really come to an end. Remember before when I talked about his Exhibit A and Exhibit B tracks with Just Blaze? Well, they were actually intending on making a full-length mixtape containing all of the Exhibit songs, from A through G, which I'm sure would have been one of the coolest mixtapes of all time if we ever got it. This project would have been called The Trials and Tribulations of Joe DeFlowers. A remix of Exhibit A was released under the name Exhibit B, which featured a guest verse from Mos Def. But this wasn't intended to be the only collaboration from Jay and Mos that we got at this time. The two legendary MCs were planning a collaborative EP titled Simpatico, but as two of the more elusive artists working today, we aren't hearing that one anytime soon. As such a singular MC, it's hard to believe that Jay is such a prolific collaborator. Of course, A Written Testimony was essentially a collab with Jay-Z, but he has teased plenty of collaborative albums beyond that. Him and Just Blaze were planning on teaming up with Saigon for the album Hiroshima. He planned an EP with the New Royals titled Mutations. Jay and Ninth Wonder were going to channel Ninth's roots on an album called Big Brother. Guilty Simpson and Jay were teaming up for an album called Guilty as Charged. He and DOC were working on an untitled album as two of Erykah Badu's baby daddies. And finally, the one that would have made every other MC stop in their tracks, Jay Electronica and Lil Wayne were once working on a project called Crescent City Connection. Who really knows how many of these were actually being worked on, or which ones were just dreamed up by two artists in the studio one day, without ever getting to work on it. Either way, hearing about the albums that we could have had, it's just so disappointing. If we even got one of these, then it could have changed everything for Jay Electronica. But as it stands, they're lost forever, and just another what if in Jay Electronica's legacy. The 2010s were pretty much a void of nothingness for Jay Electronica fans. Here's how it would go. Around 8 to 12 months of no news at all, and then Jay would come out of nowhere to either release a song or share the track list to the upcoming Act 2, and then he would disappear, only to repeat the same cycle the following year. There were numerous times where he would announce that the album was complete, and even would announce a release date, and then like that he'd be gone again. But every time people would interview Jay or people close to him, they would always ask about the album, and they always had one thing that they would say: Jay Electronica's train was on schedule. Throughout this whole period, he gained and lost so many fans, thousands of people gave up hope, but Jay stuck to his guns and kept at his own pace, and I kinda respect it, as frustrating as it was, because his train eventually got to its destination. Early in 2020, Jay Electronica finally announced a release date for his debut album, A Written Testimony. I've already made a full video on this album, so you can check that out for more of my thoughts on it, but to summarize it, I love this thing. Each song individually reaches the high bar that Jay set for himself all those years ago, with his pen as sharp as ever. The only thing that's a bit disappointing about this record is just that it's too short. With only 10 songs, most of which featuring Jay Electronica sharing the time with Jay-Z, it just left me wanting more. And lucky for me, there was more coming. Later that year, his long-awaited project Act 2 was leaked online. The response to the album was so positive that Jay Elec officially released the leak on Tidal shortly after. This album is amazing, the perfect follow-up to Act 1, with a similar feel and style throughout. Now unfortunately, the version of the album that we have is pretty clearly not finished. There are plenty of spots where his verses needed to be either re-recorded or just finished in general. But even with its unfinished and rough presentation, it's exactly what I was waiting for as a Jay Electronica fan for all these years. The samples, the beats, the guest features, the vibe, and Jay Electronica, who feels so at home when he allows himself to make music outside of the norm. After the miracle of us getting 2 Jay Electronica albums in 1 year, you'd think we aren't close to getting anything new from him for a while, but that may not be true. After an immaculate feature on Kanye West's Donda, and another on Westside Gunn's Hitler Wears Hermes 8, Gunn announced that Jay Electronica would be signing to Griselda Records. The thought of a Jay Electronica album curated by Westside Gunn is almost too good to be true, and after I've gotten my hopes up so many times, I try not to think about it. But if it does ever drop, you know it's going to be one of my favorites. After a career of what could have beens, I still try to focus on the what could be's. I'm not sure if Jay will release an album this year, in 10 years, or never at all. But call me crazy, I'm forever holding out hope that we're just around the corner for another Jay Electronica project. Thanks for watching, everybody. I kinda made this video by accident. I started off just writing a video about the unreleased projects of Jay Electronica, and it kinda just morphed into a full career retrospective. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. Jay Elec really is one of my favorite artists of all time, so even when I say he wasted his greatness, it's all out of love. Let me know down in the comments 2 things. Number 1, what is your favorite Jay Electronica song? And number 2, what Jay Electronica collab album do you want to hear most? As always, shout out to my patrons. The link is in the video description to the Patreon, as well as to my website where you can get the first issue of Def magazine. Thank you all so much for the support so far this year. As always, I got a lot more headed your way, so stay tuned, stay safe, and stay def. Thanks for watching.